Well, hello, and once again to Devotions with Pastor Joe. We are on our fourth week of them, and we're just enjoying thinking about the ways in which God makes us free of the things of this world, free of the resources and the money and the powers, so that we can live that fully joyful life, trusting in God as our Father for all of our needs, and just being a blessing to everyone else through His love being expressed through us. It's a wonderful thing to walk in the promises of Christ. Now, He's taught us, as we've seen over the last couple of Sundays, that in the Scriptures, Jesus teaches us about be watchful, be careful, because these other things of the world have a strong power over us, and they can really end up ruining our lives. They can become our obsession and our concern. Not only do we want a lot, but we also get worried about having enough, and those things kind of, in a sense, they torpedo our lives, and we end up wasting our lives running around after things that God was going to be happy to supply without all of that effort. So as we're looking at these things this week, I've been looking at the things that just, they either help us or hurt us, and I want to talk about some of the things that hurt us and then look at the advice of what would help us. Now, one of those things about us that doesn't help us when it comes to being free from those controlling influences is that we as people are very competitive. We are often competing for things, and that competition ends up, in a sense, destroying the good influence that we could have on life. James, the Lord's half-brother, wrote this great book, very practical book, but he doesn't pull punches. He's quite in your face about this. In his chapter 4, which talks about, are you a friend of God or are you a friend of the world? Because if you're doing friendly worldly things, you're working against God. Do you know that? You've become an enemy of his. Now, obviously, he's not trying to condemn people, but he's trying to provoke in us the understanding that Jesus said, you're going to be devoted to one and not the other. You can't be a friend of both God and money. So he talks about this quite logically. He says in chapter 4, what causes all those quarrels and fights among you? Let's just break it down. Where does that come from? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and you don't have, so you murder. You covet, cannot obtain, so you fight and you quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. When you ask, you don't receive because you ask wrongly. That is, you want to spend it on your own passions. You adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. And I think that's one of the sad things about us as humans, is that we are made in the image of God, and yet we don't do anything. We oftentimes get stuck not doing anything to build up his image. We are working against his plan. He wants to care for people, help people, love people, grow people, heal pain, not cause pain. And James is very practically saying, have a look. How much has your desire to have for yourself, I'm asking this question of myself, how much has that led you, in a sense, to see other people hurt? Obviously, but not directly. I didn't go out and punch anybody. But that's not what James is saying. It's the desire to constantly have that ends up making other people have less. And that's that competition spirit, that spirit of, I need to have, and if I don't have, then it's somebody else has it. So I better get it, because if I don't know if they'll give it to me, so I've got to compete to have it. It's a pretty desperate situation, and it makes everybody against one another. We're all fighting, and it's a hard thing. You look at the way that the world runs now. Countries work against one another. We try to write contracts and arrangements so that we benefit, not that they benefit. It's all about us. We're number one, and we need to be taken care of. Now, what James is saying, this part in James 4 is actually from earlier in James chapter 3. He says this kind of thinking is actually coming from the world and from the demonic powers of the world. He says in verse 13 of chapter 3, who's wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him be shown by his works in meekness of wisdom. If you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, don't boast or be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes from above. It's earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. So he says, guys, competition is ruining the planet. And we need to start fighting for other people. Think about how much happier and better your life would be if you thought everybody who is around you is fighting for you. This whole community that you live in, fighting for you. Oh, you're struggling? We'll get it for you. You want help? We'll be there. You need relationships? We're on the task. If you lived in a world where everybody was helping you, you would just feel so blessed and you would feel free. And it would probably, you'd put your guard down and you would start, rather than spend your time all about you, you'd be helping them too. And James is saying that's heaven's logic. Heaven's logic. So this competitive world in which we live is hurting us, but Jesus wants us to live in a freer way. I'll finish with this one story. Somebody once described heaven in this way. They said, think about heaven like this. They claimed that it was kind of like a vision of heaven. In heaven, there was a pot of food, but there was only large, long-handled spoons, so that you could get this food on your spoon, but because it was so long, you couldn't get the handle in your mouth. But everyone in heaven was well fed because they scooped what they could and fed every other person. So everyone was well fed when we fed each other. But he said then he had a vision of hell, and hell had the exact same thing. There was a pot of food and long-handled spoons, but everybody was starving because they couldn't feed themselves. Now, I think God wants to bring a lot of heaven to our lives, to be people who scoop in our lives and feed others, and then trust that God will take care of us, either through them or from his own divine hand. So be free, live without competing, trust that Jesus is competing for you, and then we can start to help others. In that way, we become peacemakers rather than peace destroyers. So God bless you. Have a great day.